Yo everybody, me and Buster Green here, and today we're talking about Spider-Man. So yesterday, after the insane hell of waiting for decades, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man came out on Disney Plus last night, and I was so jazzed for this because I've just been waiting for the show since fucking 2016, and now it's 2025, so I waited 9 years. And yeah, I'm gonna tell you guys up front that they dropped the first 2 episodes, and I kinda hated the first episode, but then I loved the second episode, so I'm really glad they did it this way, because if they only had dropped the first episode, I think it would have hurt the show, and I would have been like fully out here just like being like, nah, this ain't no good. So overall, there's a lot to say about the show, and I'm gonna go over everything. I'm going to start by going over the show's pre-production because, yeah, this show was a fucking nightmare to get made. The show has been in pre-production hell for over 9 years. That's insane, right? That's like almost as long as the stupid Flash movie, and I think that the show's first episode, it's kind of suffered of a result of that 9-year production value because the first episode feels off to me. Anyway, let's tell the story. 9 years ago, Tom Holland premiered as the MCU Spider-Man in Captain America 3's Civil War. And immediately after that, everyone loved him. Everyone loved Spider-Man being in the MCU. And so in 2016, 9 years ago, work was immediately begun to create a Spider-Man MCU prequel show revealing the secret origin of the Tom Holland Spider-Man, because Civil War skipped over that. And because of the draconian Sony MCU Spider-Man agreement, that agreed that Sony can make all the Spider-Man movies they want, but Disney can make Spider-Man TV shows. And what better premise for a TV show than the untold origin of this MCU Spider-Man? Like, we still don't even know if he had an Uncle Ben. Like, it's implied there, especially in No Way Home, but they never, like, really talk about it. Anyway, I think it's also worth mentioning that 9 years ago, when this was all announced initially, there was a show called Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which spun off from the original Avengers movie. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a pretty weird show. It posits this branch universe where Agent Coulson somehow survived the events of the Avengers movie, except not really, because it turned out later that the Coulson in the show was actually a robot or something stupid like that. And then he created his own team of like secret agents. And the show had this really weird relationship with the MCU where it was basically like, it was initially a show that could fully reference the MCU, and it had really strong ties with the films that came out when it came out, like Captain America Winter Soldier and Iron Man 3. But as time trickled on and as the show kept going, it weirdly drifted farther and farther from the MCU. It ended up having this like one-way street relationship with the MCU, where like shit from the MCU could trickle down in the show, but shit from the show would never trickle back up to the mainline MCU. And I think finally when we got up to Avengers, Infinity War, and Thanos and the snap happened, the show kind of realized it was fucked, and it never dealt with the ramifications of that, and it just like quietly let itself get canceled. But anyway, back to Spider-Man. So yeah, the show was initially planned to be Spider-Man freshman year, and it was initially just going to be a limited series strictly telling the origin story of Spider-Man and the events before and after Civil War leading into Spider-Man Homecoming. This show was originally supposed to be promotional material for Spider-Man Homecoming, and it was mostly focused on Spider-Man's origin, seemingly working like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in that MCU adjacent model that would take material from the MCU and like one-way street it and show how it got set up. In Civil War, Stark interrogates Peter and mentions that Spider-Man has been sighted around New York for the past 6 months. And supposedly from the leaks at this time, the show was going to tell the story of what happened to Spider-Man in those first 6 months. But in a hilarious ironic twist, now that the show is finally out, even though the first episode does give us a version of his origin, they then immediately skip those 6 months just over again. Ha! But unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, the show ended up languishing in development hell for so fucking long that it didn't even make sense anymore. I'm also going to mention that around this time period, Hudson Thames was originally cast as Tom Holland's voice double and seemingly cast for this show. But initially, because of the show not ever coming to fruition, he initially just got started doing Spider-Man's voice for certain attractions at Disney California Adventure's Avenger Campus until the show What If debuted in 2021, finally showcasing Thames in a slightly more substantial Spider-Man appearance. But it's funny that he had this big break in the show, and the show didn't come out for like a decade later. In the meantime, Thames just had the TV Spider-Man role on lockdown all the while. So yeah, back to real life. 2017 comes along, Spider-Man Homecoming comes out, and the show is obviously not done. 2 more years pass, Far From Home comes out. Where's the show? It's not out. So then more time passes, and Spider-Man No Way Home comes out, and there still isn't an origin show. By this point, people were absolutely starting to believe that the show was canceled and it was never going to see the light of day because it had already gone way too far from Spider-Man Homecoming and the whole premise of the show existing as a promotional vehicle for that. And after No Way Home comes out, Disney Plus comes out. And when Disney Plus comes out, Kevin Feige gets poked on to the gangplank and does a Disney Plus investor showcase thing in 2021 after Far From Home, where he finally mentions the show again, along with a bunch of other Disney shows, some of which never quite came to fruition. And his main point was you should pay $10 a month for Disney Plus because you don't want to miss out on all these ancillary Marvel shows that contradict with the movies anyway. And so yeah, we all bought Disney Plus, we all watched WandaVision, and then we were like, oh hey, in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, Wanda is fucking crazy. Anyway, meanwhile, in 2021, Jeff Trammell from Craig at the Creek was finally assigned to be the showrunner of the show and clean it up. And this all came after he supposedly failed to pitch Marvel a passion project. But yeah, so he was now on the show and trying to clean it up. And then in 2022, because the show was public knowledge after the shareholder thing, they did a panel for it at San Diego Comic-Con where the show was kind of formally introduced to the public at the time. They showed some art, and in the panel they announced that the show had already been greenlit for a second season called Spider-Man's Sophomore Year, which supposedly, instead of covering Civil War and Homecoming, would then cover the next year of Spider-Man's life and the events, I guess, leading into Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I want to say at this point, they realized that it was fucking stupid to make a show that was setting up a movie that came out 5 years ago. And I want to say someone at Disney hit a giant reset button and completely reset everything about the show. There was a small press narrative at this time that the crew of the show acknowledged the reset, and they said that the writers felt like they were being pigeonholed by the show's original premise of just being locked down to the now draconian canon of the MCU, as well as the structure of the show, that each season of the show would be a year of Peter's high school life. And so the whole show was reset. There was also another tangent that the show was supposedly set up to connect to the original version of the Disney Plus Daredevil reboot, but then that show was also reset because apparently it was initially not connected to the Netflix Daredevil show, and the returning cast from the Netflix show absolutely hated that. So anyway, Daredevil is still in the show, but who the fuck knows what anything connects to anymore because nothing matters and no one's trying as hard as they used to. Anyway, so and then after Spider-Man, the show was reset. It's no longer in the MCU sacred timeline and all that BS. It's now in this parallel branch timeline to the MCU because multiverse, woo. And the big difference between being a show set in the MCU and being a show not set in the MCU is now it's kind of a what if MCU show about what if instead of Tom Holland being scouted by Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man, who's now long dead in ancient history, in the what if premise, he's now scouted by the evil Norman Osborn, which, okay, good for them. That's a cool twist. And so that brings us now to the year 2025, where the show finally came out. But even just before it came out, there were even more controversies because everything's a fucking fight. Everything's a fucking controversy nowadays. So boom, we're in controversy corner. Here we are. So anyway, a trailer for the show launched, and the trailer showed the show's unfinished animation, and people were very nitpicky about that unfinished animation. The trailer had some obvious animation errors, the most jarring of that being that in a lot of the shots, none of the background characters were animated, they were just standing there awkwardly, and that threw a lot of people off. The other thing is that the show uses cel-shaded CG animation at a full cinematic frame rate of 30 frames per second. It also uses heavy amounts of rotoscoping and motion tracking, and that's kind of jarring to fans of traditional animation. I think the final show looks good because it does allow them to fully capture the cinematic and acrobatic movements of Spider-Man that we've gotten very spoiled on lately in Spider-Man movies and video games. But yeah, the trailer was unfinished and the rotoscoping looked like shit. I was almost considering if the rotoscoping in the final show was really bad to just like dunk on the rotoscope for this like whole video and like actually rotoscope this video. But like, anyway, the final show, it still has animation problems because they've done it this way, but it didn't seem as like bloomingly wrong as the trailer was, with the exception of a few characters just unnaturally moving and holding pose keyframes for way too long because for like whatever reason the animators stopped moving them. Now, the last major thing that has happened that has upended the show and ended up being the absolute biggest controversy of all was that recently, while trying to hype up the show's Spider-Man voice actor, Hudson Thames, went onto a Reddit AMA and was asked by a troll, "Hey Spider-Man, your show is woke." And the voice actor politely responded to that troll with this full quote, "Well, my biggest fear was that it was going to be annoying and woke, and it wasn't." And I was like, yes, this is great. It's so well written. It feels so real. But unfortunately, that quote ended up pissing off a lot of people because he said the show was not woke. And then the show's showrunner came to his defense saying he misspoke, but literally no one online is having it, with people on the far left accusing Thames of being a panderer, accusing him of being a racist, accusing him of reacting to racists and being a racist himself, and people on the far right, meanwhile, being like, "Oh no, there's black people on the show! That's woke! Spider-Man lied to us!" With people online making fun of the fact that in the show, Spider-Man is the only and last living white boy in New York, and obviously creating a show where Spider-Man is the only white person in New York is therefore in itself racist. Since the show is being received well, I'm gonna guess that Hudson Thames will probably keep his job because this quote was out of context, but it's amazing that it literally pissed off every single person in the country for having their own unique, horrible interpretation of it. Man, I don't think I've ever seen an actor fumble this hard on something this small ever before. Additionally, on top of that, there was a lot of like controversies with the show using like race swapping, with Norman and Harry Osborn now being reimagined as wealthy black characters, which I'll talk about later. And then the second episode also stirred up its own controversy by re-racing and regendering Dr. Kirk Connors into this sexy black lady. Although Doctor Strange is still white, right? So we at least know that canonically two white people exist in this universe. Anyway, I'll talk about that later because now I want to go over the show and I want to talk about that organically in the structure of the show. So yeah, the first episode, didn't like it. The first episode is rough. I do overall like the art style the show landed on, trying to become a funky marriage between modern CG animation and cinematography while trying to echo back to the original 1960s Ralph Bakshi's Spider-Man show, the first animated Spider-Man show, and in terms of also doing what they did while trying to straightly adapt Steve Ditko's original art from the original Spider-Man comics. I should also mention that when I signed up for Disney Plus back in the day, one of the main reasons I even bought Disney Plus was so I could watch the old Bakshi Spider-Man series, because I've never seen that series online. It's extremely hard to find DVDs or bootlegs of it, and the internet loves memeing on that show because like some parts of it were so stupid. And still to this day, the Bakshi Spider-Man has never been uploaded to Disney Plus, so I feel like I was deceived and what the hell. Give me my fucking Bakshi Spider-Man already. Now, on top of that, starting off the show has an opening song that's pretty cringe. It's like a remix of the Bakshi Spider-Man intro song, remixed with this like super generic, dumb rap song. I don't think I love this because the song is just bad, and if anything, it kind of reinforces the racist sentiment that this is a show about a Spider-Man surrounded by black culture, unable to integrate with it. But yeah, overall, the opening sucks. The animation for the opening is good. I like how hard it's trying to reference the old comics, but overall, I hope they change the song. I'm not digging the song. Okay, anyway, let's start going over the first episode. So the first episode starts off promising enough with Peter going to school, May gives him a ride, and before he can even walk into the door, oh my god, a sky portal opens up, and it drops out Doctor Strange to explain the portal, and then it drops out the Venom symbiote on top of this funky Bugman. The Bugman has this like big fuzzy collar. For like a second I thought he was Kraven, but no, he's just like some weird alien Bugman. And then on top of the Bugman is the radioactive spider for some reason, which in this continuity makes it actually an alien space spider, which makes him just like fucking Japanese Spider-Man. So, oh shit, is this the same spider that bit Japanese Spider-Man? Is this the spider from Planet Spider? Anyway, it's not explained, you just have to like deal with it. So Strange and Venom have this giant like epic MCU fight, and immediately they blow a hole in like Peter's school, and I'm surprised they don't kill anyone because it's a pretty big fucking hole. Peter himself is caught in the crossfire, but somehow he doesn't really care, even though like he doesn't even have powers yet, and that should like technically be like really injuring him. But anyway, Strange and Venom leave, and Peter immediately ignores all that to introduce himself to this hot Japanese goth girl named Nico Minoru. Anyway, I don't know what the fuck happened to Venom. I think Strange took Venom away. But yeah, the plausibility here is that maybe the symbiote got left behind to set up Venom later, unless I missed it. But anyway, back to Nico because that's all the show cares about. So yeah, then Peter is super focused on Nico. And in the first episode, Peter immediately meets and befriends Nico. But then like a second later, like they skip ahead. In the next scene, it seems like they've literally been like best friends since childhood. And Nico kind of seems like super into Peter. Like she's unnaturally clingy for a random girl character. Anyway, that kind of felt like a mistake to me. It felt like they retconned it from like an earlier draft where they were always childhood friends to them not knowing each other in the opening scene because they needed to introduce Nico. And it all doesn't track. But why would they skip over their entire relationship to just like they make them extremely close to each other like a few months later? Okay, one more thing about the pre-production because I had to look it up. Apparently the show randomly swapped out Ned and MJ from the Spider-Man movies for Harry Osborn and Nico Minoru, aka Sister Grimm from the Runaways. Now, I'm not sure why they did this. I guess it's just different for the sake of being different. But Nico's character is pretty low on the Marvel power ranking. I'd say she's like an F rank character. In short, she's like a bisexual Japanese magical girl character. She's always been a pretty cool character in the comics with like her own fan base. Despite the fact she says she's bi, she is mostly considered a lesbian by fans due to her commonly being shipped with women. I'm not sure how I feel about her being Parker's bisexual best friend and therefore a replacement for MJ. I mean, I overall think she's a pretty cool character, but I also feel like it's weird if they're literally just retelling the story of Spider-Man Homecoming with some differences and now she's in MJ's role, then doesn't that fate her to ultimately become Peter's girlfriend? And it's weird that this character is kind of like well-renowned for being like a hot girl lesbian. Like, who the fuck knows what they're doing? But in the meantime, she's just a copyright avoiding Zendaya character. And if Peter ends up like with her, I guess it would be refreshing and new, but I can also see like fans of the character having like issues with that, with her like randomly being Peter's girlfriend. Anyway, yeah, so right now the show establishes that Peter has a female best friend that he's not into because he's randomly into a random girl named Pearl Pangan. Pearl Pangan is a random new character who seemingly replaced the race swap version of Liz Allen from Homecoming because that character had too much baggage, I guess, both from Homecoming and from the original comics. But unfortunately, he can't get with her because she is unfortunately already dating this random jock football player named Lonnie Lincoln, who the show really wants you to know is from Harlem. Lincoln is another weird character because he seems to be a narrative replacement for Flash Thompson as Peter's rival and bully, but he doesn't actually antagonize Peter, and he's not a bully. He seems to be a friendly guy just coming from a weird troubled background. And meanwhile, Peter instantly resents him for dating the girl he likes. So if anything, by not being Flash and by Lonnie just being a seemingly nice guy, a sympathetic character from a troubled background, it makes Peter look worse by comparison, and it seemingly makes Peter seem like a cringy incel who wants to invalidate other people's relationships and fuck their girlfriends. Anyway, I'm not really sure where the show is going with Lonnie yet, but it seems very weird that they really want you to know that he's from Harlem and that he's had a rough life. Meanwhile, Peter makes his Spider-Man uniform, and it's a completely different Spider-Man uniform from the one in Civil War. That one had a hoodie, this one has like a hockey jersey. It's kind of like a spider hockey uniform. I guess Kevin Smith would love that. I overall like the costume. What I really like is that at this point in the show, he doesn't have the web slingers optimized, so he needs like a nitrogen tank, and Peter's like constantly adjusting the tank. I thought that was a really cool detail, although I really hope that a supervillain eventually catches on to that and blows up the tank. That would be awesome. Anyway, there's like a blink and you'll miss it scene where Peter saves Harry Osborn, but I don't think they acknowledge each other. And then the big fight scene of the episode is that Peter beats up a bunch of YouTubers doing like Logan Paul, Johnny Somali YouTuber crimes. One of them gets a brick to the head, which everyone was joking would probably be a fatal concussion, if not serious permanent brain damage. So yeah, way to go, Peter. You just killed that kid. At the end of the show, they redo the scene from Civil War. that introduced Peter and Tony Stark to each other. And they also set that up by having a weird moment where Peter pulls a DVD player out of the trash just to like track with Tom Holland's improvised dialogue. We're introduced here to Norman Osborn, who just seems to be a stereotypical black gangster in this universe. So now that we're here, I need to talk about Black Norman. Overall, I think I'm 80% cool with it. I thought that ever since like they rebooted Spider-Man and like the Andrew Garfield movies, I feel like they should have recasted Norman Osborn to be black, just simply based on the basis that in the original like Ditko comics, he gave Norman like this stupid hairstyle that made it look like he had cornrows, and everyone always joked that Norman and Harry in the comics like had cornrows and it was stupid. So casting a character that actually has cornrows as Osborn gives you a character that is closer to the comics in some weird roundabout ways. And let's face it, when he inevitably becomes the fucking Green Goblin, the Green Goblin is just a guy in a rubber suit. So at that point, it doesn't matter what fucking race he is because it's just a rubber suit. The character, meanwhile, is played by openly gay actor Coleman Domingo, which is a problem for some people. So far, the only complaints I have about him is I don't really know where he's going with the performance yet, but that's only because Norman so far has only had one line in each episode so far. I do think Domingo's voice is a little too high-pitched for Norman, especially the way he's drawn like a linebacker here. I guess, ironically, he kind of sounds like Mike Tyson. Is this like Coleman Domingo doing a Mike Tyson impression? That's kind of weird and a wild take for the character, but I'll reassess this character later, but so far, I'm okay with it. So as long as we're talking about the race swapping, I might as well talk about episode 2, which introduces a race and gender swap Kirk Connors. What the fuck did they even name her? Carla Connors? I would go with Catherine, but okay. Overall, the jury is out on this one because they barely introduced this character, but considering that Tom Holland MCU Peter seems to exclusively date colored girls, maybe this could be a funky, inappropriate relationship if they ship her with Peter. That could be dramatic as fuck, and I'd be interested in that. I guess I'm interested overall in where they're going with this. I hope they don't make it stupid, but yeah, if she turns into the lizard and it turns out to be like a hot lizard woman or like a scary monster lizard woman, that would be interesting. Anyway, yeah, show me your lizard woman. I want to see what's happening next. So anyway, back to episode 2. Episode 2, I thought was a huge step up from episode 1. Episode 2 is where they're finally getting the show running on all cylinders, and I thought it was a lot better than the first one with a more like focused storyline. And I thought that the first episode had a lot of like weird pacing issues, and I think episode 2 like overcame that. The biggest developments in episode 2 are that Spider-Man starts his Osborn internship and ends up taking this like internship class with like 3 other science kids. Now, I did an internship before and like we didn't have a classroom, but it didn't work like that. Anyway, whatever. This is a fake show about a fake company. The other 3 kids are all worth talking about because one is clearly the current MCU Black Panther Shuri operating under a fake name. The other is future MCU's second Hulk Amadeus Cho, who was initially teased all the way back in Avengers Age of Ultron as eventually maybe existing. And the last character is this like bitchy mean white girl who is apparently the super villainous Finesse, who is apparently Taskmaster's daughter. Then the B plot of this episode is that Peter leaves the internship to randomly fight a minor like F-tier character named Butane. This is a super ancient minor character from the 90s who, if I remember my comic lore right, Alistair Smythe eventually mutates him into like a derpy looking ripoff of the Human Torch. Like all his old comic book appearances give him like this sad derpy looking emoji face. I really hope they do that in the show. I really hope the show is doing like a year 1 for him where he's just like set up as this like horrible low-level pyromaniac character, and then he gets stronger as Peter gets stronger. He also has these gauntlets here that kind of reminded me of the Shocker. And then when I'm reminded of the Shocker, I remember that Shocker was like a low-level grunt in Homecoming. So they've got this guy who's kind of giving me Shocker vibes. And then they had this girl who was like replacing Liz Allen's role in Homecoming. I wonder if they're slowly building up and slowly gliding into Homecoming's Vulture plot with this guy now. Either way, I'm intrigued to see where this eventually goes. Then the episode ultimately ends with a wacky twist of Osborn spotting Peter changing into his Spider-Man costume in the stairwell, and now 100% knowing that Peter is Spider-Man, which I want to say completely changes their dynamic in the long run. Now, I want to say overall, this is not a bad thing, and I think it actually opens up a lot of narrative doors for a new story that they could tell in this show. Because a lot of the early conflicts in the comics between Peter and Norman were spawned out of the fact that Peter didn't know Norman was the Goblin, and the Goblin didn't know Peter was Spider-Man, and when they found out, they were already sworn enemies, and it just made them hate each other more. But in this case, I honestly think this is super interesting for the narrative because there's so many different ways this could go. I guess the show is seeding that Norman is already evil in this universe and maybe already even the Goblin. So it's very likely that maybe Osborn is setting up Spider-Man to be Civil War, high-tech suit level Peter, because we know from the trailers of the show that they're eventually going to cover the events of Spider-Man Civil War. But anyway, Osborn is maybe setting Peter up as a fall guy, and therefore could then set up the Far From Home twist of fuck Peter Parker, he's a public enemy, let Jameson have him. But anyway, that's about it so far with these first 2 episodes. Before I close out this video, I do want to overall discuss like the race swap controversy and all that and everything. I overall think I'm okay with the race swaps in the show, and I'm okay with it more than like other movies and other things, because I feel like overall the show is trying to do some new ground by race swapping the characters, and I'm actually curious where the hell they're going with all of it. But usually the argument against race swaps is, well, why the hell did they do that? They could have just made original characters and that would have been better. But here's the thing, this show is doing that too, because when I see these new original characters like Grace Pangan and Lonnie Lincoln, these are characters who are new characters, but then they're replacing the roles of other characters. And I don't know how I feel about that either, because that actually seems worse to me than the race swap characters, because I have zero attention or affection for these characters, and I also kind of know the overall like role in the story they're playing because they are already replacing characters in the movies. And so far the show's done nothing to make them compelling or interesting, so I actually think that might be a mistake. Now on the flip side, going back to Homecoming did a great job reimagining Peter's supporting cast as like modern diverse kids, but where the fuck are any of they? Like I really thought Homecoming did like an awesome job like fleshing out like Peter's like high school like circle, and I can understand writing out MJ and Ned because going straight into MJ as the obvious love interest is kind of boring narratively. And Ned's got some funky legal problems because he overlaps with Genki Lee so hard that it's hard to sort out where Ned starts and Genki finishes. But seriously, where is Flash Thompson? Even the nerdy MCU version would be okay. And the only retro character in play from the comics so far is Harry. But Harry seems like he's like a celebrity who doesn't even go into school. So maybe the storyline they're going for here is that maybe Norman is going to set up Harry as Peter's best friend in some unnatural way. Like maybe Norman is going to like assign Spider-Man to be Harry's bodyguard, and that's how they'll become friends, which honestly seems more normal to me than just like Spider-Man happened to be childhood best friends with the richest kid in New York. I guess overall I don't mind the race swaps or the new characters, even though the new characters just aren't super interesting to me. I think what bothers me the most about the show is just that so many of the legacy Spider-Man characters haven't shown up so far, and they feel like they've been benched. I feel like if they're not going to use any of the legacy Spider-Man characters, then that's kind of a recipe for disaster. I'm reminded of that one CGI Batman show from 20 years ago where they went super out of their way to only use D-list Batman characters, and then the show ended up getting instantly canceled. Anyway, I guess that's everything I have to say about the show in the first 2 episodes, but that was actually a lot. Holy shit, I talked for over a half hour? Alright, I gotta go pay my taxes. Alright, hey everybody, it's me and Buster Green, and I wasn't planning on doing this, but enough people complained and requested that I'm caving in. Here are my reviews for the second batch of the Disney Plus new Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show. Overall, I guess the show has been very, very mid, wobbling between the extreme possibility and the potential of being awesome, and the potential of being very lame. It's not the best Spider-Man show, but I'd say it's better than the last 2 Spider-Man shows, so because of that, and because it keeps tying tangentially into the MCU, I keep watching it. Now, quick recap on the first 2 episodes. The first episode came out swinging, but had a lot of convoluted plot lines and a lot of bad editings, which gave me some very mixed feelings on it.
We got Nico Minoru filling in for MJ. She got a very messy intro I didn't like. But on the other hand, Venom appeared, and it was this crazy new Venom alien that I've never seen before. That was kind of cool. Then, meanwhile, probably the biggest sin of episode 1 is that they skipped over Spider-Man's first 6 months of being Spider-Man. Now, on the one hand, the MCU did the same shit, but the MCU did it because it was a goddamn Captain America movie with 12 other superheroes going on in it. There are some vague allusions to those first 6 months in the opening credits, and Disney, going purposefully out of their way to spite and annoy me, has announced that the first 6 months of Spider-Man are exclusively told in this expensive Spider-Man companion book that you can buy for money. Anyway, Spider-Man got down to some shenanigans, saved Harry Osborn, bricked a kid, and got recruited by Norman Osborn, the world's most honest man, of course. Also, a significant part of this episode was focused on Lonnie Lincoln, who is seemingly being set up as Peter's maybe arch nemesis in the show. And if he isn't, then the show is just awarding this fine young man far too much screen time. It feels like the directors of the show are way more interested in telling a story about Lonnie's downfall than they are telling a story about Peter's, rise to greatness. Now, I'm going to rank the first episode a 4 out of 10 because it was just too overstuffed with too much plot shit, and it didn't go over enough of the important details that I was really hoping to get from this show. One thing I will defend, though, from the first episode that a lot of people are having issues is that Peter uses a nitrogen tank to make his webs. Look, I don't know what your problem is with the tank, but I love the tank. I think that's very cool. I think it's very low tech. I think it makes sense that he needs a way to rapidly harden the webs, and I think that's one of the coolest things they added just because it's different, but it's fun. Now, episode 2 was a much better paced episode where Spider-Man began his Osborn internship and was instantly hated by all the other elite and classless interns. Then he had it out with an F-rank villain named Butane, who was very MCU reimagined to be very similar to the MCU Shocker. He was just like a fire element Shocker. And then it ended on the great MCU style twist of holy fuck, Norman found out Peter's Spider-Man instantly. Now, this episode kind of restored my faith in the series because it focused on Peter, it had a good Peter versus good villain story, and I'm going to rate this one a pretty hot 9 out of 10 because it did pretty much everything right. Okay, so that brings us to the next batch of episodes, 3, 4, and 5. Also, I have no idea why Disney is releasing these things in 90-minute batches. I kind of love that because it's fun to binge, but it's unusual, but overall I like it. Alright, so episode 3 was titled Secret Identity Crisis, loosely based on a comic storyline called Identity Crisis that I think happened in the 90s, where Spider-Man had a bunch of weird alter egos for a little bit, and then if I remember the story correctly, later other people took over those alter egos and just became permanent characters that Spider-Man had to live with and didn't like. I'm not sure if I'm good with this episode referencing that storyline in a way that completely does a disservice to it. And it feels like they just include the costumes here as fan service without actually justifying it well enough. Oh, wait, actually, the secret identity shit happens in episode 4. Why is that the title of episode 3? That's actually some weird inconsistency. Did they mix up the titles? Anyway, so the story in episode 3 is Norman has figured out Spider-Man is Peter, so he gets instantly weird about it. Peter, meanwhile, is stressing out over it, and he visits Nico, but he can't tell her the truth, and then he has dinner with Osborn. So this is the first time Osborn's getting a real good juicy chunk of screen time up to now. Now that I really get to sink into his performance, he sounds a lot more normal than I thought before because before he only had one line in each episode. I'm also seeing Coleman Domingo get more into the role, and it might just be my imagination, but I think Coleman Domingo here is doing an impression of Willem Dafoe for this character because there's this kind of weird vocal tick Willem Dafoe has where he makes a lot of noises, and I noticed Coleman is sort of doing that, which is cool. Anyway, so Norman confesses at dinner that Spider-Man saved Harry, and then Norman became completely obsessed with him and wanted to fund him, and that comes off as kind of shady and weird. I kind of can feel where this is coming from because there's always been this crazy weird obsession dynamic between Norman and Peter in media where sometimes Norman obsesses over Peter more than he does his own son Harry, but because Peter is smarter than Harry and Norman always wanted a smart son. But in this universe, I can't quite pin it down what's going on. It's he's basically become Spider-Man's boss and Peter's just going along with it without really anything good to justify it. Now, Peter does mention that he's mostly working for Osborn for the money, but there's this dark level insidiousness here that I can't put a finger on, where it's Peter is taking Norman's money to both keep Norman happy and in many cases to spend time with him, and that's sort of a vice versa both ways. But I don't know, there's like this weird imbalance in the power dynamic. And also, then Norman brings up that he like stalked 4 random teenagers just because he speculated they might know Spider-Man. Like, that's sus as hell. That's like some creepy ass pedophile shit right there. Now, I guess one major thing that I'm wondering about in the show, if Norman is already the Green Goblin or not. If he is the Green Goblin, then yeah, he's fucking crazy, and that justifies his batshit insane behavior. But if he's not, well then, I look forward to the very fun spiral of craziness that this show will eventually get into. Now, anyway, then the villains of this episode are some real loser characters, some like below F-rank characters, Speed Demon and Tarantula. Is Tarantula a good guy? I don't know. Anyway, they get their powers from like a robot dumpster. What? And anyway, then one of the good things in this episode is Aunt May brings up Uncle Ben, and they actually talk about it, and that's kind of huge. So it seems like based on the dialogue we have here, they confirm that MCU Uncle Ben exists, but he seemingly died of a peaceful or at least unrelated to Peter's circumstance before Peter became Spider-Man, and that's a big difference. Now, it's possible that that is a misdirect and we might have still gotten the typical origin, but I really don't think so because there were no signs of Ben in the first episode where Peter got his powers, and then May also implies that Ben's death made May and Peter have to move into a smaller apartment. So that all tracks because in the first episode, they were still like moving into that apartment. Then we get the Lonnie show again for a while, and Lonnie Lincoln fully gets traded to the 110th Street Gang for his dumb brother who ruined his life. The 110th Street Gang seems to be a reference to the movie Across 110th Street starring Yaphet Kotto, which has a hard as fuck theme song. Like, that's a great theme song. So then in the end of the episode, Spider-Man beats up Tarantula and Speed Demon, and Norman helps tell him that if they like hug each other, they'll die. I thought they were gonna explode, but they don't. They just like get shoved into a wall really fast, whatever. And this is the last time Spider-Man uses the nitrogen tank hockey jersey outfit. Rest in peace, nitrogen tank. I was the only person who appreciated you. All right, so this episode was pretty good, not as good as the others. I'm going to rank this one as 6 out of 10. The best things here were Norman getting into being a creeper, Uncle Ben, all that lore there, and the villains in this episode were kind of shit. Despite the fact they are established comic book villains, they're like so low on the totem pole that I don't care. I did feel really bad for the Lonnie storyline this episode. All right, let's move on to episode 4. Episode 4, Parker continues to be a major failure, but keeps being propped up by Norman. His boss teacher guy at Oscorp is meanwhile majorly pissed at him for like all the special treatment. This guy's got to turn to a villain and fight Peter. They're like building up the hate there too much. Anyway, Peter and Harry meanwhile start to become friends, and Norman also reveals that his office has this like super sinister lockdown mode. Like that's some supervillain shit right there. That's definitely going to be used for like some gross murder stuff later. Also, I'm having a flashback. Didn't Matt Laura have an office like this for like some creepy sex stuff? Anyway, big fascinating reveal of this episode is that Captain America's Civil War is happening at the exact same time of this episode, and Peter is completely not involved in this universe. This is an MCU adjacent universe where Peter just never became friends with Iron Man, which has some crazy fascinating implications if they keep playing this show up to Thanos and the Snap. Now, I'm assuming if they do the Snap, Peter and May would still get snapped out of existence and suffer that 5-year loss. But I don't know, I'm going to bet now that the show will probably just never deal with Thanos and the Snap because it was already too awkward in the movies. But if they did deal with it, that would be freaking cool as hell. Anyway, Norman also mentions that Age of Ultron happened to set up the Sokovia Accord. So I feel like this episode is like the biggest episode that's trying to remind people that this is all set in the MCU, but not the MCU. There's also like the pictures of Norman and like King T'Chaka in this episode. And I guess like, yeah, if this is taking place at the exact same time as Civil War, then the next movies in the MCU canon would be Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, Ant-Man 2, and then finally Infinity War, where Thanos fucks up the entire world. So technically, this also means the show is taking place 9 years ago in 2016. Note all these weird, funky 2016 fashions. Anyway, Norman gets creepy and possessive of Peter in this episode. While not really listening to Peter at all again, And yeah, Norman is kind of creeping me out. It really feels like, for me, Norman like essentially purchased Peter, like he paid him off, and Norman is treating Peter as like this thing that he owns. And Peter is too young, too nice, too dumb to really process like the sinister implications of it. Peter gets the Prodigy suit from Norman, instantly has a cape accident. Then he gets the Bugman suit, but he can't control the backpack. And then lastly, he gets like the black suit that like just scares children. So yeah, once again, why wasn't this episode named Secret Identity Crisis? Because this is like the one that's actually tangentially dealing with the Identity Crisis storyline. Meanwhile, Lonnie is like trying to be a good kid despite being sunk into this gang, and he's just freaking doomed, man. It's a sad doom story of how this like once promising kid is going to fuck up everything. He also gets sent on this semi-suicidal taco run to like this gang-owned taco shop, seemingly just so he can get like frightened of like the enemy gang, and maybe the gang leader was trying to like fuck him over. Anyway, yeah, he's just getting used to gang violence here, and like I guess that's a wake-up call for him. Meanwhile, Norman eventually finally gives Peter a suit that resembles the Future Foundation suit from the comics, and I thought that was pretty cool. So then this episode ends on this weird bank robbery by this random group of European criminals who all seem destined to become hardcore Spider-Man villains. One is clearly the Rhino, note the ugly Rhino face. The other is clearly the Chameleon. I had to look that one up, but yeah, now I notice he's got the gloves. There's this female criminal. I had no idea who she was. Apparently she's this obscure Iron Man villain named the Unicorn. Okay. And the last girl here, I have no idea who she's going to be, but she's got to be someone. She looks way too over-designed. I don't know who the fuck she is. Maybe she's Pris from Blade Runner. If you know who she is, leave a comment. Anyway, they all get stopped except for the Unicorn, who gets away. And then at the end of the episode, she gets over to Doc Ock, who gives her powers. Oh, and at another end of the episode twist, Peter also accidentally exposes his secret identity to Harry. So this episode, hard to judge. I'd say it's a step down from the last one, aside from like all the lore dumps with the juicy, nerdy MCU shit. It's a pretty bland filler episode overall. There's some big twists with Harry and the Doc Ock reveal, but yeah, I'm gonna rank this one 5 out of 10 because it just felt too much like a filler episode. It felt too much like this was just like a bunch of jokes about the other Spider-Man costumes and then like everyone moving from where they're at point A to where they're at point B. I didn't love how much time was wasted on just like the dumb gags, because for me they weren't funny. And that brings us to the last episode of the second batch, Unicorn Unleashed. So this starts with a big, great scene that reveals the show's Doc Ock, and in a really pleasant surprise, it's basically comic accurate 90s Doc Ock with a couple of minor differences. Now, I can't put my finger on it, but instead of sounding like Dr. Frankenstein, he sounds like kind of like that Weasley guy from Lost. He's got like big sociopath energy, and he's very, very much up to something. He's obviously going to try to take over the city, but I don't think he's there yet. Either way, this show's Doc Ock made me super happy because up to now, almost every character who's shown up on this show has been compromised in some way or changed based on like their MCU counterpart. And seeing super comic accurate Doc Ock show up with zero changes or adjustments honestly makes me super pleased and kind of like optimistic that the show might go off like in a really good direction again. Anyway, meanwhile, Norman gets busy, so he puts Ned in charge of Spider-Man. Oh, wait, I don't mean Ned, I mean Harry, because in this universe, Ned is Harry or Harry is Ned. Either way, Harry is the guy in the chair, which was what Ned was in the MCU movies, and it's weird. Spider-Man eventually fights the unicorn person and almost loses, but manages to get lucky that the Rhino gets pissed off with her and switches sides when the unicorn was about to kill him just for fun. Meanwhile, Nico and Peter go to the movies and they're definitely on a date, but then Peter ruins it by inviting Harry on the date, and Nico has this like, but I wanted a date moment. And wow, they really did swap out Nico one for MJ. I'm really surprised, but I guess I'm surprised in a good way. I feel like a lot of people are going to hate that they're kind of trying to ship Peter with this character who a lot of people consider a lesbian, but like in the comic canon, she's officially bisexual, so this isn't out of the ordinary, but I just know a lot of people who like headship this canon as a lesbian might have issues with that. Overall, though, I'm down for Peter and Nico having a relationship if the show is absolutely against pulling out MJ and Gwen at this point. I feel like the show is going to be a little bit malicious about it, though, and like maybe they're just gonna put Peter and Nico through some shit. I really don't think the show is handling Peter's romantic life well, and I kind of think it's just kind of like trying to torture the characters. Lastly, there's this huge gang fight between the 110th Street Gang and the Scorpion Gang. The Scorpion Gang is kind of funny because ironically, they're almost completely made up of various different people who have all had the Scorpion identity in the comic, and their positions in the gang are almost seemingly references to how popular they overall were when they were Scorpion. Like, Lonnie ends up getting knifed by the Mac Gargan Scorpion, and there's this girl here who was like the female Scorpion. And then after Lonnie gets knifed, the gang like celebrates him and renames him Tombstone. Also, what the fuck? They bandage his jacket and not his arm? That's not how bandages work, you fucking idiots. He's gonna bleed out. God damn it, you dumb gangsters don't even know the first thing about healthcare? Ugh. Anyway. Okay, so this episode, I guess we're back to 6 out of 10, and I'm mostly giving the show that for the Doc Ock reveal and the Nico drama, which was fun. Overall, the battle here, once again, was kind of lame. I didn't fully love it that Spider-Man got his ass kicked by an Iron Man villain, and then the Rhino saved the day. What the hell is that? The Lonnie versus Scorpion fight was also kind of annoying. I mean, I liked it, but the Lonnie storyline is still moving at a snail's pace for me. Like, at this point, just push the kid into a vat of acid already. I get where it's going. I get that he's becoming an unredeemable monster because forces of nature against his control are pushing him to become a criminal, and he just didn't fight against them at all to ever, like, stop that, like, chain of decay. Anyway, all right, so here's where we're at judging all the episodes. I guess overall, most of them are coming out a little bit mid, but a little bit positive with potential to do better. Episode 2 is still the best episode in my opinion, just because they actually put some like effort into developing Butane as a villain. I feel like with all these other episodes, they're not focusing enough time on the villains because I think the show is giving too much screen time to Lonnie to set up Lonnie's long-term downfall. I don't really think there's a fix for that, but I hope that once Lonnie eventually becomes Tombstone, they cut that shit out and they just give a more balance of screen time to Peter and the villains. I think that's the biggest problem with the show right now. I feel like even though I like Lonnie's story, I think it's taking too much time away from Peter and developing the other villains. Like, really, if I'm being real right now, the overall Peter drama is kind of falling flat for me because it feels like they're just not focusing on Peter. It feels like the showrunners here are more interested in telling a wacky story about Lonnie's downfall to becoming a criminal than they're focused on talking about Peter and Spider-Man drama. Like, if I'm being real, like, in these first 5 episodes, there's not enough Spider-Man in a show called Spider-Man, and that's kind of an unforgivable sin. I guess I can forgive it if it eventually climaxes in some wild manipulation twist or, like, some kind of craziness that has a decent payoff. But yeah, hopefully once Lonnie becomes Tombstone and they stop giving Tombstone half the show will be balanced better. But that's kind of one of my issues I have. Even though I enjoy the Lonnie storyline, I really don't like the way they're giving him so much screen time in every episode that it's compromising Peter and the villains' screen time. Like, I don't know if there's any way to fix that. Maybe they could have just done like an all Lonnie episode. But for right now, it's off to me and I don't like it. All right, that's where I'm at with it, you guys. I still overall am enjoying the show, and I'm very psyched to see what happens. So far, my favorite character on the show is just Doc Ock, because that's uncompromised comic book Doc Ock. All right, hey everybody, it's me, Buster Green, and I guess I'm reviewing more Spider-Man today, because it's a Spider-Man kind of week. So Disney Plus dropped the third binging chunk of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, or Friendly Neighborhood Lonnie Lincoln, as everyone has taken to sarcastically calling it. So let's just get into it. Episode 6 is the big Daredevil cameo episode, Duel with the Devil. We got some nice Daredevil-style comic book art here. The episode starts with Peter on thin ice with Nico, and he interacts with the very old man extra who sits in front of him. I've kind of wanted to call out this extra for a while, because this guy looks like he's like pushing 50. Anyway, in kind of a shitty development, it seems like Nico has decided to fully cut off Peter because they weren't able to move from friends to boyfriend-girlfriends and therefore dating, which devastates Peter, who didn't even realize she was into him and doesn't quite get it. But before we can even sit with that, Lonnie comes by and instantly cuts off Peter and steals the spotlight. Lonnie gets fired from the football team, loses his special football locker, and then Pearl starts giving Lonnie some major crap about how irresponsible and unclear with her he's being. Peter eventually gets the spotlight back and figures that Nico was mad about Harry third-wheeling on their movie date and mentions that she values honesty in their relationship. This is going to come up later at the end of the episode. So anyway, Peter tries to smooth things over with her by forcing all three of them to go out and trying to make them all friends, and he really nerdily justifies it by using algebra, which Nico is kind of into. God damn it, Peter, marry this woman. Stop hesitating. Meanwhile, Lonnie drops out of high school, so Peter ends up stuck with Pearl on the group project, and Pearl drops a bunch of drama about Lonnie being out of whack and skipping school and dropping out of school. We go back to Lonnie's house for a second where he has a fight with his brother, and then we go to the Peter-Harry story. So Peter's back at Osborn Tower. He's hanging out with Harry. There's like a blink and you'll miss it moment where Peter catches Jean sneaking around. I guess she might also be a supervillain, or otherwise she's just a snoop. What's up with that? Anyway, then he goes back to his house. Aunt Mate leaves for a hot date, and Peter, Harry, and Nico all hang out and eat pizza rolls. Damn, pizza rolls are delicious. Now, there's this awkward moment where Harry is too rich to know what a raisin is, and then Peter tries to lighten the mood by pointing out that everyone's moms are fucking dead. Wow, Peter, you're so awkward. Now, then there's another funny moment where Harry and Nico don't know how to work a VHS player, and Peter wants them to watch Predator, but he leaves, leaving the whole thing inconclusive. The show flips over to a fancy gala where Norman and Thunderbolt Ross are talking about the aftermath of Captain America's Civil War with Cap on the run. Osborn offers Spider-Man to track him down, which could be a really fun story if that ever happens. But it does go to show that Osborn was all about propping up Captain America before, when he thought Captain America made him look good. And now that Captain America is a fugitive, he's like the first one trying to collect a bounty on his head. So this kind of establishes that Osborn has zero loyalty here, and he's just a sociopath who uses people for public images. By the way, there's this dude named Gallo in this episode. It seems like Osborn registered him as Spider-Man under the Sokovia Accords. I guess because technically Osborn is endangering a minor, which will come up in this batch. Anyway, so then Osborn Tower gets broken into, so Norman forces Peter to defend the tower. But before there's time for that, we go back to the Lonnie show, where Lonnie gets targeted by Girl Scorpion and is like, oh no, she's following me, she's gonna kill me. And anyway, then back to Spider-Man. Spider-Man's at Oscorp Tower, and he eventually runs into Daredevil, who's just called the Devil in this universe. That's different. So Daredevil talks like a stereotypical superhero, and he's very quippy against Peter. He's not really fighting Peter seriously, and he warns Peter that Osborn is up to something, and then he knocks Peter out with his half nunchuck. Back at Peter's house, Nico and Harry are playing with tarot cards. Oh, hey, look, a Mephisto card. That's a joke from 5 years ago. Now, I hope Peter never gets married and decides to sell his marriage to him. Anyway, Harry pisses Nico off by not believing in marriage, and then accidentally reveals that Peter is Spider-Man to Nico, but Nico doesn't believe it. Anyway, after the Daredevil fight, Osborn completely misleads the action and tells Peter that Otto Octavius is the villain here and maybe Daredevil was a mercenary working for him. Now, I don't know for a fact that Osborn is misleading him. He could just be playing dumb and be jumping to conclusions because he knows Otto is behind the other robberies. But anyway, even Peter starts having doubts about Osborn's narrative because he didn't think Daredevil was a bounty hunter. But before they can really think about that, Osborn brushes all that aside and lets Peter know that Octavius is the main bad guy now. And there's a fun photo of them together in the past. And now that I think about it, does that mean Oscorp actually made all the stupid human enhancement gear that Doc Ock is selling to these goons? Maybe Doc Ock didn't make all that stuff. Maybe he just stole it from Oscorp. Anyway, Peter goes home and Nico awkwardly exposes that Peter is Spider-Man. And yeah, she didn't actually think he was Spider-Man, so she instantly completely loses faith with him, and that's so sad. After that, we go back to Lonnie for yet another time in the episode, and Lonnie is going to live at the warehouse now because Girl Scorpion has chased him there. And meanwhile, Doc Ock has put together the Mac Gargan Scorpion suit, and that's the end of the episode. Holy fuck, Mac Gargan is Scorpion now. What a twist. Okay, so that episode was okay. There was a lot of Peter-Nico relationship drama, which I was into. The Daredevil cameo I thought was going to be cool. The fight was cool, but overall, I'm underwhelmed with the amount of Daredevil here because I didn't feel like I got enough Daredevil action. I don't really know what Daredevil's up to, and contemplating it after the fact, I don't know. It felt like it was almost a meaningless cameo. Just be like, watch the show, Daredevil's in it. I really hope they come back to this later and explain what it was all about. Because usually Spider-Man and Daredevil clash over their common dealings with a Kingpin, and Daredevil's I gotta stop the Kingpin, and Spider-Man's yeah, but you can't break the law, haha. I'm kind of surprised Daredevil has it out for Osborn. I honestly can't remember Daredevil and Osborn ever fighting before, so yeah, I gotta wonder what the hell's up with that. Maybe Kingpin is deeper into the city at some point. But yeah, the big fan theory I'm tracking in my head is Norman Osborn the Goblin already? Is he doing these goblin things? And if he's doing goblin things, is Daredevil stalking him for doing goblin things? I'm going to rank this at a 6 out of 10 because there's enough drama here to keep it juicy, but there was still way too much Lonnie in this episode where Lonnie was just chased by a scary car. Oh my God. All right, next episode, Scorpion Rising. This is the big one. So Nico and Peter are pretty much done at this point, and that's so sad. Peter and Pearl start drifting together in the void of Lonnie being gone, and then Lonnie's brother texts Pearl, and I believe he explains where the gang are and that Lonnie joined the gang, and he explains it all to Pearl over text off screen, so great. Then we get more gang crap with Lonnie and the 110th Street gang ganging up for a big gang war against the Scorpion gang. Then, meanwhile, Peter and Norman are trying to track down Octavius, and they randomly decide that Octavius is randomly using gamma radiation with no good rationale why. I know this is just like geek lore because it's like what the Hulk uses, and maybe they're like trying to set up like that Octavius can like Hulk out or something, but otherwise, realistically, it just means that Otto would have like a mini nuclear reactor somewhere, which would be pretty easy to track in New York City. Harry tries to apologize to Nico, and it's super awkward. Nico forces him to buy her dinner, which is just pizza. Then Harry decides to give Nico a driving lesson where they challenge this random race car driver lady, and that's like a stupid scene. Pearl finally arrives at the gang factory to stop Lonnie, except holy shit, Scorpion comes out and immediately starts killing people to death with his big knife tail. Now, I love this Scorpion design. What I love about it is because it was designed by Doc Ock. Scorpion in this show is essentially Dr. Monopus because his tail is just one double-length Doc Ock arm. So that's really cool for the consistency of the show because that means that like when Doc Ock comes out, he's going to be 4 times more powerful than Scorpion. And anyway, otherwise, the Scorpion design is pretty like low tech. It's got like the tail and it's got some weird boots, but otherwise he's just like wearing a tank top. I think they're eventually going to build up to the old storyline where he can't ever take the Scorpion suit off, which always sucks, but I guess it's not as terrible as some previous Scorpion suits, since at least with this one, it looks like he can at least go to the bathroom in this design. Like, seriously, like, when I think about all, like, the stories about Scorpion not being able to take off his suit, like, how'd that guy go to the bathroom? Why didn't he just die of, like, blood poisoning from, like, his suit filling up with poop? Anyway, then Scorpion goes to kill Lonnie, so there's one thing that has kind of been bothering me, and I'm not quite sure what it is, but in a nutshell, I feel like Lonnie is smiling too much unrealistically, considering, number one, the shit state of his life, number two, the fact he's in this like dangerous gang constantly being murdered, and like I can't tell if he's either smiling because the animation is bad or the direction is bad, or maybe he's just smiling because there's some dark and twisted part of him that enjoys being Tombstone and is ignorant to his position in life. Now, I thought at this episode, the Lonnie storyline and the Spider-Span storyline were finally going to cross over and have this like big like climax, but nah, it doesn't really happen. Like what happens is Spider-Man shows up, he saves Lonnie and Pearl, and then they immediately fucking leave without interacting with Spider-Man at all. What the fuck, show? Now, meanwhile, Scorpion just keeps hulking out with the Hulk power of gamma radiation and almost kills Spider-Man because he keeps getting stronger like the Hulk. Norman checks out to track down Otto, and I guess he's doing that because he's obsessed with Otto and he has confidence in Peter. Peter also expresses that he has the situation handled, but it's still kind of a shitty thing to do for Norman to clock out when Peter's still like on the scene. Now, Scorpion almost kills Peter, which is a big deal, so Norman like freaks out and sends the Goblin Guider to get him, which at this point is just a fancy remote control drone for transporting people. But wow, that is mind-blowing because like, when you really think about it, Spider-Man's been a comic for like 60 years. And in that 60 years, the Goblin Glider has gone from this like weird, dramatic sci-fi bullshit to, of course, a millionaire has a special drone to abduct people. Like Jeff Bezos definitely would have one. And yeah, so Norman whips out this Goblin Glider and I'm super obsessed with this big question of whether or not Norman is the Goblin already. Because think about it, he's obsessed with superheroes. He has a machine to instantly make superhero suits. So yeah, I wonder if Norman has been goblining. Maybe he like took a break from goblining. Like when the fuck is Green Goblin going to come out? Because with the glider established, that means he's definitely ready to go if he's not gobbling already. Like I have to bet based on the look of that glider that when Norman does go full Goblin, it's going to be a lot like the version from like the first Spider-Man movie, which would kind of suck because I honestly prefer like the comic look where he's just like a psycho in a Halloween costume. But yeah, it seems like he's probably going to go for like the Iron Man look and just be like kind of that guy. All right, so this is probably the best episode of the show so far. I'm annoyed that the show is so weirdly against having Peter and Lonnie's storylines clash, like directly, like overlap. Despite the fact they keep giving Lonnie almost as much screen time as Peter, that's insane. Anyway, the Scorpion fight saved this episode. That fight was brutal. I didn't expect the show to go all the way with like blood and like almost killing Peter. So yeah, this episode gets my highest score, 9 out of 10. I would have given it 10 out of 10 if Lonnie and Pearl just stuck around in the battle and did not leave the second Spider-Man arrived, because that was just too fucking perfect. All right, that brings us to the last episode of The Batch, Tangled Web, episode 8. So Peter wakes up in an Oscorp hospital where everyone sees he's Spider-Man, but they're like Oscorp employees, so supposedly they won't tell. He gets the treatment. Some lady takes a ton of Peter's blood. They're definitely setting up Clone Saga here. Peter and Osborn will have a falling out, and then Osborn will just clone more Peters. Also, Norman said the suit couldn't be penetrated, and now the suit's been penetrated twice, so what the fuck is it, Norman? Or is that just bad writing, or is Norman like drinking his own Kool-Aid here? Anyway, Peter is good by the next day because of his healing factor, and then Norman gives Peter a talk down and puts him on a weird leave of absence. While Peter's leaving Oscorp, he goes down to the lab where the lab interns have built his generator machine that he pitched a few episodes. Like, I guess the other interns just built it for him. Then we also see Dr. Connors looking like longingly at her lizard. I guess they're going to somehow get fused together in some twisted way. Guys, I gotta tell you, I cannot wait to see how bad the show messes up the gender-bent version of the lizard. I don't think gender-bending Kirk Connors was a bad idea. I think it's a hilarious idea. I cannot wait to see what's going to happen. That's just like the biggest time bomb the show has waiting to go off. Because, like, think about it. She's a female lizard. Is she going to lay eggs? Like, what is going to be up with that? Anyway, May catches Peter beat up and has a big breakdown that, oh my god, she's a horrible parent. In the classic comics, Aunt May was like too old and too farsighted to see Peter as Spider-Man, but since this is the younger MCU version, I guess instead they're going that she's just busy and neglectful. Then May explains more about Uncle Ben, and we do get confirmation that Peter, May, and Ben lived together for a little bit before he died, and we finally see a picture of him and he turns out to just be some fat guy. Then we go back to Otto, who's playing some kind of cat Minecraft, Animal Crossing Minecraft. Is that a crossover waiting to happen? Anyway, Otto's desktop is a mess, but it kind of looks like mine, so I can't complain that much. Otto gets raided by the SWAT team, and he fucking destroys them while dancing to upbeat jazz, which is kind of awesome. I think he also does the Bad Peter dance from Spider-Man 3. He finally gets almost caught by Thunderbolt Ross, but then Iron Man shows up, and it's a very Silver Age Iron Man design, so that was interesting. Now, I wonder if this is the explanation for why we've never seen Otto Octavius in the MCU. Is it because Tony Stark arrested him years ago? Peter has this big nightmare about Nico because he fucked it up with her, and then he gets distracted by Pearl again. And damn it, Peter, you're so fucking dense. You're giving up gold to pursue another man's leftover cheddar. Now, I also forget where it was in this episode, but both Peter and Pearl made this unsuccessful attempt to stop Lonnie from being a criminal, and he kind of blew both of them out and was just like, I don't need you. At this point, it's frustrating how dumb and stupid and doomed Lonnie is. Anyway, May tells Peter he needs a male role model, and Peter, being dumb, decides that maybe Norman can be that because he's the richest guy Peter knew. And yeah, this is kind of a callback to the way Peter like obsessed with Tony Stark in the mainline MCU. It's starting to feel like, the show is kind of criticizing like the way that MCU Spider-Man became Iron Man Jr. With this show switching it to Norman, it's kind of pointing out like how fucked up a relationship it is that, we have this teenage superhero who's like completely reliant on this like selfish male billionaire. Anyway, Norman kicks out Harry being a bad dad and then has an awkward Peter moment where he manipulates Peter and tells him that great power deserves great respect, which is a weird, funky twist, but I'm here for that. Then we go back to the 110th Street gang. Since they lost their factory, they're now homeless and they live in an alley. They meet up with Chameleon, who tells them that Otto Octavius exists, in exchange for a bag full of their quarters. And then Lonnie is all in on this fucking gang war. Once again, I'm kind of over Lonnie at this point. Like, he's unredeemable, he's evil. Stop giving him half the show's screen time and just dump him in a vat of acid and let him start doing Tombstone shit, because he's like too evil to be saved and too unpowered to be interesting. Back at Osborn Tower, Harry gives Peter his real Spider-Man suit, and Harry is a really fucking cool friend. Now, don't get me wrong, I wish he would change his clothes because he's been wearing those clothes for like months at this point. Also, I'm not digging the man bun, but he's otherwise a solid Harry Osborn. Although he does start calling Peter Tiger like Mary Jane, which is weird. I'm sure people are going to read into that. Alright, this is a pretty nice cooldown episode after that super bloody chaotic Scorpion fight. And the whole shit with Norman here was juicy enough to keep the episode solid.
I'm going to give this one another 7 out of 10. Even though it was a filler episode, a lot of fun things happened this episode, even though they were just trying to get the plot from point A to point B. Like the Doc Ock SWAT team fight was kind of the centerpiece of the episode, and I kind of love that. The only way this episode could have been better is if he had actually fought Iron Man, and Iron Man wasn't just like another senseless cameo. Alright, so that's it for the third batch of Spider-Man episodes. I think the next batch is the last batch, unless they split that batch in half, just to milk the show a little bit longer. So quickly responding to some feedback I got from the last episode video I did. Okay, so overall, I don't hate Lonnie. I hate the amount of screen time he's getting in relevance to his downfall and his rise as a crime boss. Now, I heard some people talking that they now expect this to be a consistent thing. Like this is always going to be the Spider-Man Tombstone show. And like 3 years from now, like when the show is in its third season, Lonnie will still have 50% of the screen time. No, absolutely not. I couldn't stand it if they did that. Like, I'm expecting Tombstone to be the end of the season villain. I'm expecting Tombstone to finally be defeated and arrested and like a big pity party. Like, oh, poor Lonnie, he had it all and he threw it away because of no particular reason. I just personally don't really understand why Lonnie keeps going back to the gang, other than the fact that he's earned like mutual respect for them. But I mean, like, that's short-sighted, because doesn't he realize he has no future as a gangster, especially when he seemingly had like a promising NFL career set up at the start of the show? Considering all the build-up they give to Lonnie in the show, they never quite explain what he's doing or what his motivation is. Like, what is his transaction with the gang? It doesn't seem like they're paying him. It doesn't seem like it's a part-time job. It doesn't seem like he has a drug problem or any other vices that would like need all this money that they're not paying him. It just seems like he's a follower and an idiot. If anything, Lonnie accepting this life of crime so carelessly just feels like it's the cliche stereotype of football players being idiots. Like, I'm expecting Lonnie to be in jail by the next season, and in a perfect world, maybe they'll just give Lonnie screen time to the next big bad guy. If they do that, I'm good with the format of the show. Like, think about it like if Eddie Brock shows up in the next season and Eddie Brock has as much screen time as Lonnie, then this could be a really cool show. I kind of think that's happening since they already said Venom in episode 1, and that's like a hanging plot hole. So let me know what you guys think. Yo everybody, it's me, Buster Green, and the last 2 episodes of Disney's Spider-Man dropped, and these episodes are pretty weird structurally, so let's talk about them. Episode 9 is basically the climax and the end of the first season. It was the episode that I felt in various ways everything was building up to, with Lonnie's storyline and Peter's storyline finally meeting up in a creative climax. So the episode starts with Doc Ock reading over the Sokovia Accord so he can form a legal defense against it. Norman shows up and confirms Doc Ock made all his tech himself, so that answers that question I've been starting to have about that. Osborn had nothing to do with Doc Ock's tech, but then Osborn decides to fuck Octavius and steal it all for himself. He even gloats in Ock's face to just extra piss him off and establish that, yeah, now they hate each other. So then we go back to the Lonnie storyline one more time, where Lonnie and the 1/10 decide they're going to steal Doc Ock's stuff from the cops. And yeah, that's bad. Lonnie is now fighting cops. Peter then randomly saves Nico from a runaway truck, and I guess they're cool. The Scorpion shows up to kill everybody. The 1/10th Street gang is broken up by Scorpion. Their main guy runs off like a little girl. Lonnie finally got doused in acid, thank God. I knew that was coming. Better late than never. And so Lonnie and Peter team up in a double super team to beat Scorpion. Now, Peter almost went too far and killed Scorpion in what felt like a direct callback to Spider-Man Homecoming. But I feel like it wasn't as well earned as Homecoming, since we've relatively seen Peter push to his limit before, and he usually doesn't go into full murder mode, but I'm willing to forgive that in this series because he was going through a lot of mental anguish and Norman egged him on. But yeah, Lonnie ultimately stops Peter, and then we get a relatively very satisfying moment where just for a nice second, it seems like Lonnie could have been a superhero, but he won't. Peter's good with Lonnie, and Lonnie seems more stable than ever after gaining his powers, but unfortunately Lonnie has, in the long term, embraced evil and will ultimately continue to fuck up his life. I'm remembering now out of nowhere that Tombstone was in Spider-Man on PS5, and in that game, Spider-Man and Tombstone were friends, even though Tombstone was like an enemy and a convicted felon, so I think they might be like leading into that version of the character. Anyway, episode 9 is probably the best episode in the entire season, so I give it a 10 out of 10, just because all the like various threads in the show were all building up to episode 9. Now, The final episode, on the other hand, is wacky. I loved episode 9, but 10 is a real mindfuck. So then in 10, Peter and Norman have this relatively nice phone call before Norman goes psycho mode and has a dark change behind the scenes. So Norman is number 1, moving towards being the Green Goblin, confirming he's not the Goblin yet, confirming he's still getting all his Goblin ducks in a row. And on top of that, it seems that he has used Peter's stolen blood to mass produce Peter's radioactive spiders for the sake of creating hundreds of other multiple spider people. Now, it would be nuts if, like, in the next season, like, Nico becomes Silk and maybe Harry becomes, like, Miles Morales. But I also think they could also just throw out Silk Miles or even Spider-Gwen randomly. And if they did that, that would be really dumb. I'm also not super going to love it if Peter ends up just becoming one person in like a large group of spider-ish people, which I feel is like what the last Spider-Man show got wrong by leaning into that too much and not making Peter special. Then later, Peter goes to his internship, and the internship is apparently ending. Norman shows very evilly that he combined all the kids' science projects together, like hobbled them together in the supervillain Stargate from the movie Stargate. And he plans on opening it randomly to open up a void portal into outer space. Now, this is a hugely bad idea. Just think about this logically, everyone. If this thing opens a hole into outer space, that would basically be a miniature black hole. It would depressurize the room. It would suck all the oxygen out of the room, instantly kill everyone. And yeah, if it hits an alien planet, you're going to get like poisonous gases from like Jupiter or like lava flowing from like Venus, and that alone would kill everybody. And of course, what actually happens is fucking aliens come through the hole. Now, before all this can actually happen, Doctor Strange shows up one more time to stop all this nonsense in a very surprised move, showing that Doctor Strange is powerful and just like steps into a corporate boardroom and is like, stop all this shit. But no one listens to him. Now, Peter knows Doctor Strange, but Doctor Strange doesn't know Peter. And then when I remembered the Eye of Agamotto, I instantly realized that some time BS was about to go down. So yeah, in short order, Venom comes out of the star hole. Strange and Venom and the radioactive spider just so happen to be in the room and all go back in time to give Peter his powers, which is dumb, but I guess that explains that. And then Strange and Spider-Man team up and beat Venom and send him back to deep space. But not before a little piece of the symbiote gets left behind to set up a big Season 2 Venom storyline. Also, hold up everything. Now, here's the part I have probably the biggest issue. So you're telling me Osborn made radioactive spiders by copying Peter's blood, then that spider went back in time to give Peter powers, and then Osborn copied the Peter blood from the Peter radioactive spider clone thing, and what the fuck? That is a copy of a copy paradox. I fucking hate that. That doesn't make sense. If that's all true, then that doesn't explain where the original radioactive spider came from. And also, theoretically, if you let this paradox play out, it would mean that you're going to eventually end up in an alternate universe where Peter's powers get shittier and shittier because he's just copying his own blood over and over and over again. And then the radioactive spider is probably giving him more shittier, unstable powers. It's basically like the genetic decay you see in like hillbilly incest, but like thrown infinitely through the like stupidity of the multiverse. Anyway, yeah, beyond all that, Norman catches a piece of Venom, and then that sets up maybe Norman's going to make Venom, or maybe Eddie Brock will get Venom from Norman, or fuck it, maybe Norman will just become Venom himself and trick us all. Like, maybe Harry will become Venom, because that also happened a lot. I feel like, though, they only turn Harry into Venom when they're like really trying to save time. I feel like this show won't be trying to save time and probably will have Eddie Brock. Anyway, Oscorp blowing up somehow causes the Osborn internship to end. So back at Peter's house, Peter, Harry, and Nico all try to figure out what to do next. And holy fuck, Nico just wraps her legs around Peter casually, and he completely brushes it off. Peter, goddammit, that's an aggressive female demand for intimacy. Like, she's like asking him to basically rub her feet or something. You fucking loser, how tense can you be? That's like one step below her just like kissing him directly, or like an unsolicited back rub. By the way, in episode 9, Peter almost kissed Nico like she was Mary Jane in the Tobey Maguire movie, but she just punched him in the face in like a very, very unsatisfying like twist of the expectations. By the way, I guess I'll take a second here to talk about Nico, because over the weekend I saw a huge online like lashback at Nico for the way she acted in the last batch of episodes. Now, since I watched all the episodes, I know her behavior is kind of shitty, but I understand that she was mostly hurt because she felt Peter lied to her, and he told his big secret to Harry, a guy he had just met. But on the flip side, this episode makes her seem much worse by revealing that Nico is actually like a witch or something and has her own dark magic powers that she lies about. So yeah, if she doesn't confess that to Peter immediately, then yeah, she's a fucking hypocrite and she deserves all the like flashbacks she's getting online. Anyway, Nico drama aside, Nico, Harry, and Peter randomly arrive at this idea that Harry's going to use his Osborn money to basically take over the Osborn Institute with this idea that it's basically going to be like the Future Foundation in the comics, except Harry calls it, in this universe, the Web, which is just so fucking corny, so fucking stupid. Come on. How can you be that stupid? It doesn't even like seem at this point it's like a company that involves Spider-Man. It seems like it's just like Harry's new company that Spider-Man so happens to work at. Anyway, so that's basically the setup for the next season. Harry is going to build this super science team to keep plot moving. And then the end of the episode is just all this like other random drama and all these like crazy update reveals to like make you be like, oh, season 2 is going to be so interesting. So yeah, Norman has the Venom symbiote. We already talked about that. There's a big reveal that Jean was Finesse already, which I expected. But then the weird unexpected twist here is that she's also Daredevil's teen sidekick. What the fuck? Also, I don't know about you guys, but for me personally, it's super creepy for like a middle-aged man superhero to have a girl teenage sidekick. I feel like that never ends well. Also, since when does Daredevil have a fucking Robin? Like, that's crazy to me. Amadeus Cho gets invited to Harry's web group, but he blows them off because he's being a douche and up to something of his own with Oscorp. Oh, and there's a setup for Nico's storyline next season. So now that Nico has magic, she's able to use like a Ouija board or something to summon her dead mom. Okay, so here's what's interesting for that, for me. I think that this might be a big twist, and it might be a dark, fucked up twist, because we actually don't see what Nico is talking to. And even though Nico calls it her mom, it's super fucking creepy because it could be literally anything. Like, the first thing my brain is thinking of is like the dead mom ghost from Dan to Dan, where it wasn't actually the character's mom. Or more probably, reasonably, it could probably be Mephisto, because they teased a few episodes ago that Mephisto's out there. Doc Ock in prison plans to build the octopus suit to be an upgrade over the scorpion suit, like I predicted. And lastly, Lonnie gets an invitation to the company too, but I don't think he takes it seriously. His skin is slowly starting to turn to stone, and he throws his football jacket away, fully embracing a life of crime as the New York gangster Tombstone. So, fuck this show if they are truly going for the Lonnie Lincoln and Spider-Man variety hour. If Lonnie still gets half the screen time in season 2 after having a full heel turn to evil, which a lot of people are predicting is going to happen, I'm like so over the show. Oh, and there's one more post-credits scene where they like suddenly reveal that Peter's dad is alive. Oh, I hate that too. Like, oh my fucking god, that's just like the bad Peter Parker was destined to be Spider-Man twist, and also his dad's alive from Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like, that was a bad twist before, so like, why use it again? Ugh, come on, don't recycle bad shit. Okay, yeah, so I kind of hated this last episode. This one's back down to a 6 out of 10. The only thing I liked was Nico randomly being sexually aggressive towards Peter. Otherwise, the strange Venom time travel nonsense was so annoying. The fact that Peter got his powers from copying a copy of a copy with the radioactive spider super annoyed me too. All the season 2 setups kind of annoyed me. Like, half of the storylines they set up for season 2 were all like, well, of course, that's fucking obvious, or just annoying. Like, this Daredevil setup's weird. Like, since when did Daredevil have a kid? The one with Spider-Man's dad is weird because I don't know what they're planning with that, but it can't be good. And also, the dad in jail is like literally like the same fucking plot line as The Flash. So now I'm just feeling like I'm watching the CW Flash again, which just reminds me that the CW Flash went majorly downhill as it like existed for years. But hopefully this show won't do that because it's animated and had a bigger budget. But I already feel like this last episode is setting up like so many mistakes to happen in season 2. Oh, and now I'm hearing online that season 2 is going to shoehorn in Spider-Gwen. Ugh, that doesn't make any sense for fucking like year 1 Peter. I really hope that's a hoax. If not, oh man. Hopefully they don't set that up in like the start of season 2. Like, if they rush into Spider-Gwen, that's a huge mistake. So yeah, overall the show is like ending up at probably a 6 out of 10 to me. Like, there were only 2 real episodes I really enjoyed. The second one and episode 9. The best things going on here were the Norman twist and the random not quite all the way romance with Nico and the general MCU tie-ins that like were amusing to me. But the worst things on the show were mostly just Lonnie. Now, I don't hate Lonnie, but Lonnie just wasn't that interesting for most of the episodes that focused on him for like half the episode. I feel like Lonnie needed to turn evil faster, or he needed to like just be like more compelling in his storyline, because he just seemed like he was just going through the motions as he like ruined his life. Like, I feel like he should have had like more of like a confirmation about what his objective was, why he was doing this, why he turned his back on life, his like otherwise promising future. And like still to this day, I don't really know why Lonnie became a gangster, other than the fact he randomly discovered he was good at being a gangster. Like, if anything, I feel like I would have been happier if they'd just given Lonnie screen time to Harry. But then again, that one episode where they did give it to Harry and Harry just like drove around his car buying Nico pizza was kind of stupid too. So I don't know. For the most part, I like Harry, but yeah, Harry will hopefully come into his own more in season 2, unless he randomly becomes Green Goblin and dies horrifically. So yeah, overall, this show's been okay. Interesting enough to keep watching it. It hasn't made a lot of the mistakes that I feel like the last 2 Spider-Man shows have done. But then in this last episode with season 2, it feels like season 2 is just waiting to make all those mistakes as fast as possible. So I'm kind of worried. All right, that's about where I'm at with this one. Sorry to take it a little bit short, but like I said, the last episode kind of let me down, so I'm just like over it now. All right, let me know what you guys think. Thanks, later.